News of the Times. The case of Joseph Auerman. Welcome to News of the Times. This interesting story from 1806 recounts the tale of the desperation facing a man whose debt is closing in on him. A respectable family man, and initially a baker by trade, who has always paid his bills on time, he finds himself facing ruin from a bill collector who seems to revel in his misery. The question that will face the court is this murder or manslaughter? A story that is a bit different from our usual fare, but one that could still take its place in our own times. And we continue the Georgian theme with a spooky story from Ireland. If staying at a castle in Ireland, as one does in one's spare time, beware the face in the window which foretells death. We hope you enjoy the show. Background. This case from the wonderful author of Paul Johann Anselm Ritter von Feuerbach recounts the true tale of a man being hounded by a man to whom he owes money. Regularly mocked, threatened, and ridiculed, the story highlights the question, what drives a good person to do an evil deed? From the Book of Strange Crimes, 1828, an impeccable man and citizen, and ultimately a murderer. Joseph Auerman is a Catholic, 36 years old, and was born in the small town of Bioingris, where his father, who had died 8 years ago, lived as a master baker. The files here show a law-abiding and generally respected citizen who, in the throes of converging circumstances, unexpectedly falls into a cruel crime that seems to be in glaring contradiction with his proven character, with his entire life up to that point, and with all his inclinations, passions, and sentiments. He initially made a living from the baker's trade, but later gave it up and took over a brickworks, which, together with the associated land, makes up his fortune, which is worth around 4,000 guilders, but he has debts of 2,000 guilders. He has been married for 10 years and had 4 children in this marriage, 2 of whom are still alive, a 10-year-old girl and a 1-year-old boy. Auerman, far from ever having suffered a deserved punishment from the authorities, was generally respected for his absolute integrity. All the witnesses, fellow citizens, neighbours and household servants who were interviewed agreed on the following description of his character. He was a thoroughly honest and law-abiding citizen. With tireless diligence, he tried to support his family honestly and to advance his business. He did not gamble, drank little, was kind to the poor, and was friendly, obliging, and helpful to everyone. He was devoted to religion, not just to its customs, but to itself in his thoughts and actions. He never sought quarrels. He was entirely peaceful, accommodating, and not in the least inclined to flare-ups of anger. He knew how to bear and forgive insults. He would listen to mocking jokes about himself with good nature and would even laugh at them himself. It was the usual sign of his greatest anger when he stopped speaking. His servants praised him for his kindness and gentleness. He was also an exemplary husband. After 10 years of marriage, his wife testified that she had never had a quarrel with him. With such qualities, a witness who had known him as a neighbour for 19 years could rightly say of him, "I have never known a more honest man in my life." The servant, Conrad Pogel. According to a witness, he lived with the servant Pogel, the very man he ultimately murdered, like a father with his child. When Pogel once embezzled some of his things, he remained peaceful and loving towards him as before. Auerman owed the sum of 400 guilders to Pogel, partly in arrears for wages for his servants and partly in money he had borrowed from him. Pogel left his service and he bought a private property in Deitfurt and needed this sum to pay the purchase price. Pogel sued for payment and Auerman was ordered by a judicial decree on November the 29th, 1806 to pay Conrad Pogel the capital sum owed, plus interest, within 4 weeks to avoid execution. Attempting to raise the money, Auerman immediately made preparations to raise this sum, which he did not have on hand. He went to many people in many places. He spared neither promises nor requests, but his efforts were in vain. A town priest turned him away with a sneer and caustic words. Many wanted to help him, others could not. He went to a certain Johanna Bauer 3 times, at different times with this request. When he was refused the same thing the 3rd time, he threw his hands together and exclaimed, "For God's sake, what am I going to do? I'll be executed. I am a respectable man. I am ashamed." Nevertheless, he did not tire. On December the 18th, he went to a certain Schirmer and asked him sadly and urgently for help. But like the others, he had to leave without money and without a firm promise. With tears in his eyes, he went to more than 12 people and only brought back empty hands or uncertain promises. The deadline approaches. On December the 19th, 14 days before the deadline, Pogel finally came to his house from Deitfurt. Pogel demanded the money he was owed and declared that he would not leave the house until he had received the sum owed. He actually moved in as if for execution, pushing his way to the Auerman's table and stayed overnight in the house, where he took up residence in the brick room. His behaviour towards the unfortunate debtor was now a constant, gross insult. At every opportunity he called him a fraudster or a scoundrel. He could not be silenced by the most peaceful counter-arguments, that the deadline had not yet come and that he would receive his money. Even the servants became embittered with Pogel and pitied the master. The maid testified that Pogel never demanded his money other than with insulting accusations, and always repeated, "Everyone says I won't get the money, but you're going to the executioner. Everybody says so." He behaved like this almost at every meal, and whenever he saw the master hardly dared to go into his own room. The same witness stated at another place that during Pogel's 3-day stay, she had often seen and heard him pestering her employer for the money he owed, and insulting him with such cutting words that many a hot-tempered person would have killed him after hearing just one such word. This was the same opinion held among all the witnesses about Pogel's impudent behaviour. 1 week from the deadline, on December the 21st, a Sunday, Pogel continued his mischief with almost greater impetuosity than before. At the table and after dinner he again pressed the unfortunate debtor with all sorts of importunate and insulting words, calling him a bad man and a scoundrel who was not bringing him his money, and shouted, beating his trousers with his hands, "The money must come, even if it comes down from the firmament." Then Auerman lost his patience. He hurried out of the house with tears in his eyes because he could no longer bear the torment of these reproaches, and to try again whether he could not free himself from his tormenting spirit by bringing him the money. But now I cannot stay any longer, as the man torments me, he said to his maid as he passed by as he went out of the house. As he was leaving, he had seen one of his brothers, who lives in a neighbouring village, riding into the town from his window. Other acquaintances from the surrounding areas were also in Bale Ingris that afternoon. He hoped to get help, or at least helpful advice, from one or the other of them. He spent the whole afternoon in vain trying to find what he had previously sought, but his brother was unable to help him. The acquaintances he spoke to, or others to whom his acquaintances recommended him, were not helpful either. The tavern visits. Since the people from whom he expected his rescue had to be sought out in various taverns, and he was always referred from one to the other, he spent the whole afternoon and part of the evening in taverns and drank a variety of drinks beyond his usual habit. As a rule, he only drank 2 or 3 and at most 5 half-litres of beer. That afternoon, up to about 7:30, he had, according to his calculations, consumed a total of 14 half-litres at various breweries. If one considered that Auerman was not at all accustomed to drinking so much, that he had drunk a lot of beer mixed together, and at that very time his mind was irritated by fresh anger, and passionately moved and shattered by anxious worries, fear and hope, then his claim that he had finally become intoxicated is certainly very likely, although not a single one of the witnesses interviewed claimed to have noticed him being drunk. This condition does not manifest itself in the same way in all people, and is hardly noticeable in many, especially in those with temperaments such as that of the Inquisitor. At 7:30 in the evening, he finally left the inn called Waltherthea, the last of the inns he visited that unfortunate afternoon, and headed home. And this came the path to his crime. The crime, his confession, is as follows. As he went home, he was preoccupied with the sad thought of his unfortunate situation, of the insults he had already endured from Pogel, and of the new insults he was about to face. Then I was seized with anger, he said, and I thought, if the rascal is still at home and is again pestering me for the money, which he has no right to do in my house, especially as the payment period is not yet over, then I will kill him. He is no longer worth paying anything. The deed. So he climbed onto his brick floor, lay down on the straw, and slept till about 9:30. When he awoke, his misery was once again before his mind, with all the passion and feelings that had revolted his head against the unbearable creditor. His resolve had also awakened from his sleep. I now climbed down into my house. These are his own words, with the full intention of hitting Pogel, if he was still there, and tribulated and tormented me again, even if I killed him. But he immediately added, by way of explanation, I had the full intention of killing him. When he knocked on his house, the door was opened for him by Pogel. Pogel was already half undressed and had laid down on the straw in his bed in the brick room to sleep. Auerman went in with him, took the soup that his wife had left him from the oven, and sat down to eat. He had hardly done this when Pogel began to admonish and urge him again. Auerman retaliated for these words by accusing him of the disloyalty and theft that he had been committed in his service. This led to an exchange of words that ended with Auerman taking a piece of wood that was lying by his right hand and throwing it at Pogel. Then, with his left hand to the ground, he shattered Pogel's skull with repeated powerful blows until Pogel died under the blows. When this was done, he laid the body in the bed filled with straw, put it in a sack from the head to the lower part of the body to prevent it from bleeding into the room, and then dragged it out onto the brick floor where he hid it under the straw with the body's clothes. He then busily wiped away the traces of blood, and at 12 o'clock he went up to bed with his wife. The next morning, that same morning, he also revealed the murder to his wife. The crime did not remain hidden from the servants for long either. The sudden disappearance of Pogel, various traces of blood in the straw, and the contradictory suspicious words and actions of their master soon revealed his terrible secret to them. Finally, on December the 26th, 5 days after the crime, the maid called him and his servant, Auerman, into a room to one side. She told him of her suspicions about the murder of Pogel. He confessed his crime to both of them, but they initially remained silent so as not to become traitors to their master. Driven by fear of conscience and on the advice of his servants, he finally decided to turn himself in to the court. With this intention, he went to the district judge's house on December the 28th. As he entered, the bride of the slain man stood before him, an unexpected sight, which struck so deeply into his conscience that, dismayed, without saying a word, with a wild look in his eyes, he quickly turned around and hurried out of the door. Confession. On the same day, the court statement by Auerman, the servant, preempted his own self-reporting. The investigation was then decided, and Auerman was taken into custody that same night. In his first interrogation, he confessed to the manslaughter. He only claimed that the thought of mistreating Pogel had only occurred to him during the exchange of words in the brickworks, and that he had killed him in self-defense because he had come at him with a knife. However, during the third interrogation, he retracted this claim as untruth and confessed to the crime as described above, which he also persisted in the subsequent interrogations. On December the 30th, the body was dug up at the place indicated by Auerman. All those present recognized the body as Pogel. The court inspection and autopsy were carried out on the following day. All the injuries were on the head. The back of the head was completely shattered, so that in some places even the brain was penetrated. The report of the district court physician concluded that these wounds were absolutely fatal. Murder or manslaughter. The Penal Code of Charles V makes an important distinction between murder and manslaughter. Manslaughter is understood to mean a dismemberment that is decided upon without prior deliberation, in a sudden outburst of anger and carried out on the spot. Murder, on the other hand, is understood to mean a dismemberment that is decided upon with deliberation or carried out in a state of deliberation. Manslaughter is threatened with the punishment of the sword, murder with the punishment of the wheel. If one considers that the immediate cause of Auerman's fatal act was the previous insults from Pogel, that in the midst of a quarrel and with mutual bitter reproaches, the first piece of wood was grabbed and used to carry out the attack. Then the less serious crime of manslaughter appears to be present. However, a killing carried out in the heat of the moment is not manslaughter, out of suddenness and heat of anger. Auerman had already decided to kill Pogel, in case Pogel again frightened him about his guilt. On the way home, he had already made up his mind. So that he would not be disturbed or discovered whilst carrying it out, he did not go straight into his apartment, where he noticed the light, but wanted to wait until his housemates were asleep. When he woke up in the brick barn, the resolution with which he had lain down was made up and confirmed again. With this intention to kill Pogel in the assumed probable event, he went down from the brick barn to the dwelling. All this clearly indicates the deliberate killing that is murder. The verdict. If one imagines the situation in which this man, who was already wringing his hands in despair on December the 11th, found himself on the 21st, and compares it with his character and his deed with everything that preceded it, one can assert with the utmost probability that his crime was decided and carried out in the confusion of a state of mind bordering on despair. On that unfortunate day, everything that could shake even the strongest mind rushed at him, but which could crush his own, in which softness and weakness are least to be mistaken, and dissolve it in faint-hearted despair. On that day, Pogel's insults had reached their extreme. The unbearable disgrace that had driven him from his home, the hopes of getting money that were always repeated and always thwarted, the indignant feeling of honour that was suddenly about to fail because of the merciless harshness of his creditor, the fear of new insults and the bitterness about the past ones. All this fermented and fought in his shattered soul, and was confused when it came to the idea of taking bloody revenge for its pain on the hatred perpetrator. Added to this was the overheating caused by drinking, which did not deprive him of his reflections and consciousness, but only gave those shattering thoughts and feelings even greater vitality, clarity, and strength. He insists that after waking from his brief 1.5-hour sleep, he still felt intoxicated and even carried out the murderous act in the throes of intoxication. The intoxication only wore off when Pogel lay before him as a corpse, a claim that has too much psychological truth to be entirely fictitious. On the way back to his home, where the intention of killing Pogel first arose in him, an incident also came to his mind, which even seemed to favour his crime with the opinion of the law. He did not decide directly to kill Pogel. He postponed the effectiveness and execution of his intention until Pogel repeated his demand in an insulting manner. The crime would probably not have been committed if Pogel had not immediately fulfilled this condition and, as it were, challenged the will to carry out the decision. Auerman's behaviour after the crime was committed is consistent with everything that has gone before. The pangs of conscience that immediately gripped him, the confession he made to his servants, the difficult journey to the district judge's house to hand himself over to justice, his detailed, remorseful confession in which he admitted guilt of the crime at the very first interrogation. After these considerations, the state ministry submitted a request that His Royal Majesty should design to grant Auerman mercy, to spare him the death penalty, and to permit an extraordinary punishment to be imposed on him. Further particulars. Ireland's reputation for spooky tales is confirmed from this excerpt from the diary of Lady Fanshawe, who, on a visit to a friend's family estate, encounters a familiar spectral apparition. From Thomas Crofton Croker, 1825, The Memoirs of Lady Fanshawe, wife of Sir Richard Fanshawe, Baronet, ambassador from Charles II to the courts of Portugal and Madrid. From hence he went to the Lady Honour O'Brien, a lady that went for a maid, but few believed it. She was the youngest daughter of the Earl of Thomond. There we stayed 3 nights. The first of which I was surprised by being laid in a chamber when, about 1 o'clock, I heard a voice that wakened me. I drew the curtain, and in the casement of the window I saw by the light of the moon a woman leaning into the window through the casement, in white, with red hair and pale and ghastly complexion. She spoke loud, and in a tone I had never heard thrice. A horse, and then, with a sigh more like the wind than the breath, she vanished, and to me her body looked more like a thick cloud than substance. I was so much frightened that my hair stood on end and my night clothes fell off. I pulled and pinched your father, who never woke during the disorder I was in, but at last was much surprised to see me in this fright, and more so when I related the story and showed him the window opened. Neither of us slept any more that night, but he entertained me with telling me how much more these apparitions were usually in this country than in England, and we concluded the cause to be the great superstition of the Irish, and the want of that knowing faith which should defend them from the power of the devil, which he exercises amongst them very much. About 5 o'clock, the lady of the house came to see us, saying she had not been in bed all night because of a cousin of O'Brien of hers, whose ancestors had owned that house, had desired her to stay with him in his chamber, and that he died at 2 o'clock. And she said, I wish you to have no disturbance, for 'tis the custom of the place that, when any of the family are dying, the shape of a woman appears in the window every night till they be dead. This woman was many ages ago with child by the owner of this place, who murdered her in the garden and flung her into the river under the window. But truly I thought not of it when I lodged you there, it being the best room in the house. We made little reply to her speech, but disposed ourselves to be gone suddenly. That concludes this episode of the Walsoken tragedy of 1885. We really hope you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy the show, we would be very grateful if you could like, comment and or share the video to friends, family or even your family pet. It all helps to keep us relevant in the giant ocean that is YouTube. Thank you all. Your support is gratefully appreciated. You have been listening to News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles.